Welcome back to Fantasy Football Today, presented by Snickers. Snickers satisfies. I'm Jamie. That's Dave. That's Heath. We're looking at the wide receiver and tight end waiver wire options for week number 3. Let's start with the wide receivers and some names at the top here that I think should be certainly added across the board. I don't know how many more times we're going to have to sit here and say, pick up Sterling Shepard. He's been so awesome through the first 2 weeks of the season. But we told you going into the season that he might be the best Giants wide receiver with Kenny Golladay hurt and struggling. And so far, so good. For those of you that have bought into Sterling Shepard, please continue to buy into him moving forward. Rondale Moore coming off a strong week 2. Tim Patrick stepped up in place of Jerry Jeudy. And you see some of the other names here, whether it's Mooney or Ruggs coming off some productive games in week 2, or some stash candidates like Elijah Moore or KJ Osborne. And then we can't leave out the Lions, so we have to put Quintez Cephas on this list. Let's talk about Sterling Shepard. So Heath, it feels as if we've been saying this for months now, but 2 straight games, 19 targets, over 90 yards receiving each of the first 2 games. But it also goes back to last season. He closed last year playing really well with Daniel Jones. Can you see this continuing, or does the eventual run game get going with Saquon Barkley detract from him? And then when Kenny Golladay gets going, does that detract from him further? Or is he just kind of locked into this safe PPR floor with what the ceiling has been the last 2 weeks?
I don't think he's going to be a top 20 wide receiver as he has been the first 2 weeks of the season, but I do have him ranked as a top 25 wide receiver this week, and I think he could be top 30 rest of the season, at least in full PPR. He should be rostered everywhere, and I think sometimes we talked about him as only a PPR wide receiver. He's a high-end number 3 wide receiver in PPR. He's still a starter, though, if you start 3 wide receivers in non-PPR. He should be added in all leagues. I think the ceiling for him this year is probably 20th, but I expect him to finish top 30, 35.
Dave, what's your expectations for Shepard when Golladay gets going and Barkley gets going?
See, the problem is that I'm not sure that that's ever going to happen where both of those guys are going at the same time. We know that Galladay's taken a while to get accustomed to the Giants' offense, and we know that he's not the perfect picture of health. And we know that when Saquon gets going, that offensive line is still going to be a problem in New York. And I think Shepard, one of the great things he does is takes a lot of short passes and converts them for first downs. It's the extension of the run game that we talk about with a lot of wide receivers. I think that might continue to happen here. I think Daniel Jones is very comfortable with him as well. So I agree with Heath. I think he's got that safe floor, and I think he's got a chance to be minimum top 30 PPR wide receiver rest of season.
It's going to be interesting to see. And Kadarius Toney could also get in the mix. We'll talk about Evan Ingram coming up in a second as well at the tight end position. He's missed the first 2 games. So it's not going to be this consistently, but if it's this consistently, he is the waiver wire pickup of the year by far, and what we've seen from him through the first 2 weeks of the season hopefully will continue for those of you who have bought in. Let's talk about Rondale Moore, because it's a crowded receiving core for the Cardinals. We've already seen Christian Kirk have a 2-touchdown game in week 1. Rondale Moore had the big game in week 2. He did have a 77-yard wide open touchdown in that game against the Vikings. But A.J. Green scored in that game also. So, Dave, is Rondale Moore going to stand out above the trio of guys behind DeAndre Hopkins with the veteran in Green, the guy that's been sort of the steady Eddie for the Cardinals the last couple of years in Christian Kirk, or is it going to be the rookie?
I like the rookie. I'm just trying not to be so fixated on that 77-yard touchdown that he had, because it was really kind of a wacky play. It was wide open. But he showed you what he's capable of doing when he's got open space. And this guy creates his own space. We saw it at Purdue. We're seeing it now in the first 2 weeks of the season. And I like that he's got 13 targets. He has one more target than DeAndre Hopkins in this offense.
He leads the team.
So this is somebody who could absolutely continue to morph into being the number 2 receiver for the Cardinals. And it's an offense that's on fire right now. So I agree that Shepard should be the priority, but Rondale's right behind him. I think that there won't be very many crazy big plays like the 77-yard touchdown, but I could see him getting 4, 5, 6 catches a game and having that safe PPR floor with the upside to boot.
Heath, when you look at the other guys on this list, Patrick, who stepped in for Jerry Jeudy, and look, the playing time was basically even between him and KJ Hamler, but Patrick was the one more target, a lot more production. 1 catch for Hamler, 3 catches for 37 yards and a touchdown for Patrick. Darnell Mooney, 6 catches, 66 yards on 8 targets, more targets, better production than Allen Robinson. Henry Ruggs, we know what the upside is there. First time in his career over 5 targets. Of those 3 guys, short-term, long-term, who's the best play?
I think it's going to be Mooney for both for me. And he had a good game in week 2. He should have had a great game. He had a drop about 20 yards down the field from Fields. He had another target in the end zone. I couldn't tell if it was off his hands or just out of his reach. But there's going to be more downfield shots. Andy Dalton has thrown 1 pass over 15 yards so far this season. It shouldn't be a surprise that Darnell Mooney struggled with him a little bit. I think there will be more shots with Fields, and Mooney could be a number 3 wide receiver.
Ruggs, I hope, just starts to do a little bit more in the first half of games. All of his production so far has come in the second half of both of the first 2 games, but nice to see his targets rising. And then for Elijah Moore, it just feels like Zach Wilson's just missing him, and so there's going to be a lot of production ahead. Tough matchup in week 3 against Denver, but then the 2 matchups after that, I think it's Atlanta and Tennessee. Much nicer situation for both, for Elijah Moore, hopefully for Zach Wilson as well. But Moore, 8 targets in the game against the Patriots. I think there's definitely going to be better days ahead for him, so pick him up now before things become a little bit too risky if, in fact, somebody else is going to beat you to it. And look, KJ Osborne has had 13 targets through the first 2 games of the season for the Vikings as the 3rd receiver behind Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen. Deeper leagues, go pick him up if he's available, because seemingly taking the Irv Smith role as the 3rd option in the passing game and doing a nice job with it. So a lot of options at the wide receiver position, but Sterling Shepard clearly the headliner there.